I also admire your constitution, by which I mean two things, which I want to see in Ukraine: checks and balances and constitutional rights. This is something what I admire about your country, this spirit of freedom, this very American human right pursuit of happiness. It's very American human right. So, and I want to see Ukraine like the United States in this regard. Ukrainians, we tend to be independent. We don't like government, for example. We tend to be a little bit anarchistic sometimes, but which is a good thing.
The spirit of the Cossack.
Yeah, exactly. This is a Cossack republic, but there is more freedom in this. In this regard, we are closer to the United States with our spirit of freedom.
So, as is always the case when I am putting together this program, one of my primary concerns is that between filming and publishing, that events might happen which will change the context of whatever it is we discuss. And that has happened this week. Because our guest is Dr. Oleksandr Merezhko. He is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Ukrainian Parliament, the Rada. And as you can expect, he is a very busy man. Finding a window in his schedule took weeks to arrange. Now, the conversation which you're about to watch, because I do still think that there is an awful lot here of importance, and it will be of benefit and informative to you, I hope. It is, however, a little bit outdated, and maybe our conversation would have gone a slightly different way if we'd known what was about to happen. Not a day after we sat down, it was announced that U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth had given the order to cease shipment of military assistance to Ukraine, notably including artillery shells so important on the front, but also air defense, so important in the cities. And while I can't say that the two things are directly connected, a couple of days later, on July 4th, this city, Kiev, came under intense and vicious attack, starting several fires and blanketing the city in smoke. Nevertheless, also on that day, Dr. Merezhko sent me this statement, signed by over 60 dignitaries from around Europe and here in Ukraine, members of various governments. In it, they urged the Trump administration not to abandon them, to continue to provide the arms and the defenses that this country so desperately needs to fight against an imperial master. They also make the point that both the United States and Ukraine, in their pursuit of finding their own sovereignty and breaking away from colonization, they hold the same ideals, those being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Normally, I enjoy proudly celebrating Independence Day. I'll put out the flag, I'll order or I'll cook something distinctly American. I'll sit down and watch a historic movie or a show, and I'll reflect on the American project, something I still firmly believe in. I didn't do that this year. I just hope that Dr. Merezhko and all the other brave Ukrainians, which I am so privileged to stand beside, can forgive us. So, Dr. Merezhko, we thank you very much for coming to speak to us here at On the Edge today. It's a great privilege. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
First and foremost, in your position as the head of the foreign relations part of the Parliament, the Rada, what is your primary goal when you interact with either traveling abroad to meet with other dignitaries or having those representatives come here? What is your primary mission when you interact with your opposite numbers in the world?
When we're talking about activities and powers of our committee, we perform several functions. One of them is, of course, about ratification and denunciation of international treaties, which is extremely important because international treaties are part of our legal system. And the recent example is minerals deal, which was recommended by our parliament. Before that, the Rome Statute. And so on. As for parliamentary diplomacy, it's also important, especially during the war. And it's important because if we look at other states, Western states, for example, in particular, our allies, our partners, parliament plays a crucial role in foreign policy. Power of purse, so to speak, because it's budgetary issues. For example, American Congress. A lot depends on finance when we're talking about conducting foreign policy conducted by the president himself. But parliament, in this particular case, American Congress plays a crucial role. So this is one part of our job, to persuade our counterparts in parliaments of other states to continue to support Ukraine and even to build up to enhance this support. Also, we're involved in the so-called parliamentary alliances or parliamentary associations. For example, Parliamentary Assembly of NATO. Again, our delegation is doing a great job by trying to persuade our colleagues from NATO member states to continue to support our bid to become finally the NATO member state. So, and another example of our activities is Interparliamentary Union. We have also delegation, and for us, Interparliamentary Union is a platform which allows us to meet our counterparts from the global south, from distant countries, for example, African countries like Rwanda, like all kinds of Asian, African countries, because it's difficult, to organize a special trip to these countries. But having this platform, it makes things easier to communicate directly. And again, to tell them about what's going on in Ukraine, to dispel some stereotypes, myths, misinformation, or Russian propaganda, and also to continue to convince them that it's important, that it's in their best interest to support Ukraine, because it's not only about Ukraine. It's about global security and it's about international law. Today, we're a victim of Russian aggression, but no one is guaranteed in this dangerous world that tomorrow some other African country or Asian country might become a victim of the potential aggressor. So please support us right now. Why do you think it is so difficult sometimes to convince other nation states that not only is it possible for Ukraine to succeed in this war, to defend itself, but also to be a functioning state? Why is it that Ukraine has to go to the world to convince them of this? And why do you think it's been so difficult to get that message out? A lot depends on concrete political and economic interests of the country, because each country is guided by its own interests. For example, we don't have to persuade our closest friends like Baltic states or like Poland, because they know from their historical experience what it's like to deal with Russia or even to be under Russian occupation. And for them, it's a matter of their security. They're too close to Russia. They understand that if we fail, the danger is that they might be after us. Yes. And the thing is also that Russia is trying to establish hegemony or domination in Europe. So, and these countries, you don't have to persuade them. They come, their delegations come to Ukraine, and the first question which they ask, how can we help you? But when we talk about countries, distant countries, which are far away, they sometimes might have their economic interests related to Russia, like trade, like oil, like gas, and they view it as some kind of distant war in Europe. They don't care much. And at the same time, sometimes we appeal to the values, which are very important also, because Ukraine is fighting also for certain values like democracy, like human rights. And for instance, such distant countries as New Zealand or Australia, again, we don't have to persuade them because we have common values. And they are very eager to help us, to provide us with help. On the other hand, there are countries which have like in Africa, for example, which are flirting with Russia and China economically, politically, and they pretend that they're neutral. But the reality is that they have, I would even say, selfish interests, which they put in the first place above values, above international law. And for such countries, it's more difficult to deal with. And that's why we need to come up with a persuasive enough argumentation for them. Sometimes it's difficult, but, I'm an international lawyer, and for me, it's a bit easier because I'm using international legal arguments and trying to prove them that it's in their best national interests to support Ukraine. Because thereby they're supporting international law, international legal order.
Well, and some of these countries, as you mentioned, might have a neighbor that might look at what Russia does as a green light to also do. I know the Taiwanese, for example, have been closely monitoring what's happening here in Ukraine. What has been effective in you getting your message out, and where have you found difficulty in trying to not only get the message out, but also to create relationships?
Yes. First of all, when we're talking about different regions, we need to adapt our arguments to specifics of these regions. There may be history, culture, their world outlook, and so on. In Europe, it's easier because, again, the issue of Ukraine is issue of all European security. Unfortunately, some countries, Hungary, they don't understand this, and they're trying to play the game with Russia and China, which is not fair, not only with regard to Ukraine, but also with regard to general or common European security. So with Europe, it's easier to deal. They understand, at least most of responsible politicians and countries, they understand the need to support Ukraine because we play the role of shield of Europe right now. It's more difficult to deal with African countries, but I have noticed one peculiar thing. Those African countries, which are democratic countries and pro-Western, they have no problem and they support us wholeheartedly. If we're talking about authoritarian regimes, it's more difficult because they associate themselves with authoritarian Russia or China. And it is a problem. Again, it's a problem not only of interest, but also values. Certain common values. When we're talking about Asia, for instance, I participated in a delegation. We have a special status of observer at ASEAN Parliamentary Assembly, and we met lots of delegations from different Asian countries. And I have noticed also one interesting thing that sometimes you can unexpectedly meet someone from the Asian countries who understand you. I can give you a very simple example. Vietnam.
Okay.
Vietnam. We talked to the delegation from Vietnam, and they are very clear on support of Ukraine when it comes to our territorial integrity and sovereignty. They make very good statements in support of Ukraine because they understand that when they support us, they support also their interests. They don't want to become a victim of big neighbor, That's why they understand us. And you're absolutely right. If we're talking to representatives of a small country in the Middle East or in Asia or in Africa, which lives in the shadow of big aggressive neighbor, the chances are that this country will support us. But when we're talking about bigger state, which is authoritarian, which has economic interests with Russia, unfortunately, they tend to maybe even to ignore, or at least to pretend to be quasi-neutral. They might say, we're for peace, but it's abstract. To me, it's a hypocrisy, because how can you be neutral when you have very clear-cut crime? Aggression is a crime. Genocide is a crime. When you have a victim of this crime and the perpetrator, you cannot be neutral. You cannot pretend. It's hypocrisy. But unfortunately, some countries in the global south, they're doing this kind of politics.
Well, in certain circumstances, to not take to not make a decision is making a decision. That you're choosing not to get involved, and that's a choice in itself. What about the big elephant in the room of the United States? First the Biden administration, now the second Trump administration. America has been a supporter of Ukraine so far, but a rather reluctant sometimes supporter. How concerned are you about American disengagement from the conflict here in Ukraine?
Well, of course, I'm and many of my colleagues are seriously concerned about this. But at the same time, we should understand several important things. First of all, we still believe in the United States because we're talking about the country. And a policy of the president, of the current president, it's not like the whole United States. It's a democratic country where sometimes I'm under impression that it might have not one foreign policy, but three foreign policies. I mean, foreign policy of President Trump, foreign policy of the State Department, foreign policy of Congress. Mm-hmm. And I would also add fourth foreign policy of American public opinion, And we can appeal to, for example, our friends and allies, potential allies in the Congress. Mm-hmm. We've been using this mantra for several years about bipartisan support. And it remains to be true. If we look at the Congress, even I would say I would even argue that many Republicans, they openly or not openly, but they are on the side of Ukraine. They support Ukraine because they understand, especially so-called Reaganites. Mm-hmm. They remember the Cold War and they understand that we have entered a period of Cold War II, maybe. Well, and with China, with Russia, yes, but still it reminds a lot. It resonates with their memory, I would say. But the fact is that most of them continue to support us. Mm-hmm. So I would even argue that Congress is on our side. And the recent example, this attempt to adopt bill on tariffs and sanctions against Russia. Yes. It's a clear indication that Congress continues to support us. With Trump administration, I understand that on the one hand, foreign policy is being made by the president. But at the same time, there are advisors, there is his entourage, and there are different people. We can see those who, in my opinion, judging on their previous statements before they joined Trump's team, they have been very supportive of Ukraine. I mean, Marco Rubio, for example.
Secretary of State Rubio, absolutely, yes.
And there are lots of people like that. So I believe that all in all, the United States continues to be on our side. Continues. And I sometimes recall as a kind of consolation for myself the famous phrase by Churchill. He said that, you know what I'm talking about.
I know this, but please proceed, yes.
You can always count on Americans doing the right thing only after they have exhausted all their alternatives.
Other options. Yes,
options, yes. And I argue that Trump is in the process of exhausting all other options. Maybe it's wishful thinking on my side, but at the same time, I know that President in his actions, especially on the international stage, he's not completely free. Mm-hmm. There are some restrictions, political restrictions, internal, external, and these kind of restrictions are more prone to be on our side. Because again, it's in the best national interests of the United States, both political and economic interests, to support Ukraine. Even if you imagine that God forbids we fall or we fail. Yes, what would be the consequences for the United States and for Europe? Yes, in terms of security and even in purely economic terms. You know that the United States will have to pay much more to strengthen the eastern flank of NATO, for example. It will be much more expensive. So even from the point of view of economic common sense, from the point of view of costs and benefits in economic terms, it's better to support Ukraine and to double down on our military support. It's the cheapest and the most reasonable approach.
I agree with you. I don't think that America can afford to completely withdraw and become isolationist, especially when it comes to Ukraine. But let's hypothetically say that they vastly decrease their assistance. What would that mean for Ukraine? What would Ukraine do in response to an America that starts to pull away from it?
I'm not a military person, but I remember that according to some estimates at least, around 30% of our weapons, they are produced by the United States. So it's a substantial amount of weaponry for us. It's important. Another problem for us is that the United States has a kind of weapons which Europeans don't have yet. So especially when it comes to air defense systems, Patriot systems is a good example. So if we are not being provided by this weaponry, it will have negative impact, especially when it comes to air defense of our cities. It might be very dangerous. At the same time, I hope and we hope that the Europeans will step in and at least they will try to make up for this kind of losses. But at the same time, I still hope that even if Trump declines to provide us military assistance like Biden administration did, maybe he will be eager to sell us these weapons, which we desperately need, and our European partners and friends will be eager to help us to buy this weaponry. So we can find solution, but again, for us it's important because we have economic difficulties in terms of budget. Yeah. Yes, we are a country which has been waging the war of attrition for more than 3 years. It's extremely difficult to fight such a war against Goliath, against a superpower, which lots of resources. We are outgunned at present moment and outnumbered. We're truly a David against the Goliath. So that's why we can win this war. And it was recently recognized even by American specialists before the Congress that Ukraine can win this war. But we can do it only with adequate support in terms of quantity and quality of weaponry from Europe and hopefully from the United States.
And I guess I also am trying to figure out there are those in the West and in America in particular who say that it would force Ukraine to the negotiating table. If we, by supporting Ukraine with weaponry, we are prolonging the war, the inevitability of Ukraine needing to negotiate a peace. If we withdraw our support, it will force Ukraine to basically capitulate. What is your response to those who say, stop supporting the war, it'll force the Ukrainians to sue for peace, What's your reaction to that mentality?
To me, it's absolutely unrealistic arguments because they don't understand or pretend that they don't understand very basic facts, that Putin himself, he's not interested in any kind of peace, ceasefire, or serious negotiations. Because Putin, I quote one of the Western experts, and I completely agree with this phrase, he cannot back down. He can only double down. Because for him to stay in power, the only justification is this war against Ukraine. And if you look at what happened with his close friend and ally Bashar al-Assad in Syria, Syria, you can see that Putin didn't come to his rescue. He preferred to lose the whole country, so to speak, but to continue to fight against Ukraine, continue to wage an aggressive war against Ukraine. It's a very telling fact. It's very telling fact because it has many reasons. It has geopolitical reasons for Putin because he is trying to restore empire. It has historical, ideological, psychological reasons all at once.
In the sense of Ukraine being the birthplace of Rus and the and the cornerstone of their empire and their identity as imperial.
Absolutely. One of my friends who was historian, he said that without Ukraine, Russian history doesn't make any sense. And it's true. It's true. At least it's kind of ideological, propagandistic justification for Putin in his kind of, in his world, in his mind. That's why, and geopolitically, Ukraine allows to have Russia, if Russia wants to be empire, and quoting Brzezinski's famous phrase, that Russia cannot be Eurasian empire without Ukraine. Ukraine, it's no coincidence that Sergei Plokhy calls it the gate of Europe. And this is the gate for Russian empire, to restore Russian empire and to have control, to have influence over the whole Europe. He cannot restore Russian empire without Ukraine. So it has many reasons. And that's why we should be realistic about the fact that Putin is not going to stop. He only can be stopped if Ukraine is provided weaponry and if we receive reliable, ironclad, so to speak, guarantees of our security. And the best such guarantee is NATO membership. NATO membership. And for me, it's the cheapest and the most reasonable way to stop Putin and to restore semblance of peace in Europe.
That makes a lot of people very nervous, though, that the idea of Ukraine and NATO, because, of course, Article 5 would mean if the Russians did come again for Ukraine, it might instantly draw NATO in. What's your reaction to concerns of that nature by people who
My argument, and I'm absolutely confident about this, imagine a situation that Ukraine tomorrow becomes a NATO member. It would definitely stop Putin. Why? Because Putin, he realized that he is not capable militarily, by military hand, to destroy Ukraine. And he's not suicidal. And he understands that Ukraine being part of NATO plus 32 countries, it's a huge danger for him. Look at the example of Finland. Putin has always been using this argument, this is about NATO enlargement. And his useful idiots in the West, they repeat this narrative that it's the reason, root cause, yes, as they call it, is NATO enlargement. But look at Finland. When Finland and Sweden decided to join NATO, Putin didn't do anything. And the process lasted for almost a year. If Putin was sincere about his idea about NATO enlargement, he would attack. From perspective of his logic, he was supposed to attack Finland and Sweden just for trying to become NATO member. He didn't do it, which means that this argument about NATO enlargement doesn't make any sense. And second lesson to be drawn from this situation is that Putin is afraid of NATO. He's in panic. He had scared himself to death with NATO. And in his mind, this is the only deterrent which can deter him from future attacks against any country which is a NATO member. That's why Ukraine should insist on becoming a NATO member as soon as possible, no matter what who says. Maybe someone is talking about that it's off the table, so on, but, we should continue to knock on the door of NATO membership. I'm using this metaphor from the Bucharest summit of 2008. The doors of NATO are open. So please open, please be consistent, please follow through, deliver on your promise, and open these doors of NATO for Ukraine to save us.
Well, let's see what happens and hope for the best. Are you getting traction? Do you get that message across? Do you think people are starting to come around to the idea of Ukraine in NATO? Are you getting any success on that effort?
At least we continue to try. For example, we have from time to time online meetings with our counterparts, committees of foreign affairs of different parliaments. And we consistently raise this issue. We should keep it on the agenda, because I would never forgive myself if we ourselves stop talking about this. No matter what others say, they might be skeptical, they might come up with different counter-arguments, but on our part, we have no moral right to stop talking about this, which we continue to do.
And in those terms, you mean you have a moral obligation to your citizens, or you have a moral obligation to the rule of law or to United Defense? Where is that moral obligation?
First of all, it's a moral obligation with regard to our country, our nation, because we are fighting for our survival. And it's the best tool, it's the best mechanism to guarantee our survival to join NATO. Second, of course, it's an obligation towards security in Europe. It's also important because Ukraine as a member of NATO will enhance European security. We are not a burden for NATO. We can make a very considerable contribution. Our battle-hardened army is the only army in Europe, in the world, which is beating Russian army. The second, so to speak, army in Ukraine.
Yes.
Now in Ukraine. Yes. So it's in the best, again, interest of European security also.
You famously put forward a nomination for Donald Trump to win the Nobel Peace Prize, and you actually went through the entire process of submitting that nomination to the board. But you've subsequently withdrawn that nomination. Tell me about that process and your decision making.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story, by the way, which made some headlines, of course. Yes, but initially, my idea, I knew that Trump is going to be elected. I heard it from different sources, and I understood that he had very good chances. And I believe that we need to try to establish good contacts with him. Yes, and the question is that how to do it. And by nominating him, my hope was that he would choose not to be Neville Chamberlain, but FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in terms of helping Ukraine. That he has potential to put an end to Russian aggression, but not by the way of appeasement, but by the way of just peace, as I put it in this letter, nomination letter, just peace firmly based on the UN Charter and principles of international law, among which are territorial integrity, of course, and sovereignty of Ukraine. It was my hope initially. And at the
Were you kind of playing on his ego a little bit? He does like to be given accolades. From what I know, I read lots of literature about Trump and the books written by him, also trying to figure out his character. And I understood that he cares a lot about prestige. Yes, he considers himself to be a brilliant deal maker, as he put it, an artist of deal making. The art of the deal.
And he has this goal to receive a Nobel Peace Prize because he often is talking about this. He is comparing himself to Obama implying that Obama got it for nothing. I did something. I didn't receive it. So, and we dealing with other politicians or statesmen, we have to take into consideration their psychological traits. That's why even politically, I think it made some sense at least, even though I've been criticized for that. But it was my personal decision. It was my personal risk. And the same about withdrawal, because, I started to think about it seriously, and journalists also were asking me these questions. Are you going to withdraw it after this event in the Oval Office?
Yes.
After that, I started seriously.
With President Zelensky.
Yes, because, I gave lots of interviews about this, and I said on the first day after this situation, to put it mildly, and I said honestly that I'm proud of my president. I'm truly proud. And I couldn't agree with Trump the way he behaved, because even if you disagree with your guest, there are rules of principles of hospitality. You could say something, Mr. President, I don't agree with you, but let's discuss it behind the closed doors. And I would respect Trump for doing that. I respect politicians who are honest and firm in their convictions. It didn't happen, and after that came this another very kind of case, unpleasant, so to speak, when he cut off intelligence
sharing,
and also weaponry. To me, it came as a shock. To me, and I also started to think seriously about this. But the final straw, actually there were two, so to speak, final straws before I took this decision and sent this letter about withdrawal of my nomination. And I did it on the first day when I came to Strasbourg. I did it from the Peace Palace, which is symbolic in itself. Trump didn't deliver on his promise to impose sanctions on Russia after 2 weeks. He said 1.5 or 2 weeks. He didn't deliver. And for me, I was waiting whether he would follow through on his promise or not. And after that, I decided that I should withdraw my nomination. And also, after that, there were a number of very difficult nights in Kiev when Kiev was bombed heavily.
Yes.
And Trump didn't pay attention to that. He stopped paying attention. And in the morning, it was on Monday. In the morning, before that, Kiev was bombed. The night before, I withdrew. Kiev was also bombed. I talked to my family. And to me, it was like a final straw.
Those were bad nights.
Yes, and because maybe it was maybe it was a rational act. Maybe it was irrational on my part. But for me, it was a sign of my personal protest against what's going on. Because I really want him to get the Nobel Prize, but for bringing just peace, not for appeasement, not for appeasement of the aggressor.
I have contacts in the U.S. intelligence and defense and security organizations from all my time covering wars and what have you. And I have heard expressed from those sectors some concern, very serious concerns in some cases, that Donald Trump himself might be compromised by the Kremlin. Certainly he has members of his cabinet, Tulsi Gabbard in particular sticks out. Even J.D. Vance has made some very pro-Russian, has expressed some very pro-Russian talking points. How concerned are you that Washington, D.C. has been infiltrated by the Kremlin?
Well, it's hard to say. This is a kind of question I've been thinking a lot, but I don't have any proof, any answer to that. But my argument would be that since Trump managed to become the American president for the first time and second time, I trust American intelligence service. And if if he was, for example, somehow related to Russia or dependent on Russia, I think they would do everything to prevent it from happening. That's why I don't believe that he's a Russian agent or something like that. But at the same time, I think that it's in line with his general attitude, America first. Yes, he openly says, "I'm a businessman," and he thinks in terms of costs and benefits. But geopolitical thinking is different from business kind of thinking. That's why, from my point of view, sometimes he makes, again, subjective point of view, mistakes with regard to Russia and Ukraine. Another thing is Witkoff, Mr. Witkoff. I understand that Trump trusts him because he's his friend. But Mr. Witkoff is not experienced diplomat. He's also a businessman. And that's why the statements and talking points which he shares with regard to Putin, how Putin prayed for Trump's health and so on, they're very naive, to say the least. And this is the danger, because sometimes I'm under impression that Witkoff is viewing the whole situation through the eyes of Putin. And in turn, Trump, by trust in Witkoff, sometimes also is viewing the whole situation through the eyes of Witkoff, And this is very worrisome for me. This is very worrisome. That's why I think it would make a lot of sense for Trump to come personally to Kiev and to see what's going on. And even before he was elected, I openly, through one of the newspapers, American newspapers, had invited him to come to Kiev. President Zelensky also several times has invited Trump to come to Kiev. President Biden, when it was still dangerous, he had enough courage to come to Kiev. I remember that day, and it went down in history. And that's why my idea was that if Trump really cares about how he will go down in history, and he wants to truly overshadow President Reagan and even President Kennedy, the best thing to do is to come to Kiev and to say that I'm on your side, to repeat what Kennedy once did in the midst of Cold War. Ich bin ein Berliner. Or Reagan, when he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. I was a teenager at that time. I lived in East Berlin, and I saw it on Western German TV. I didn't understand. I knew some English, but that phrase, it was burnt in my mind. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Sometimes you can, being a president, you can just utter one phrase, very powerful, and it can change the whole political reality. And I'm sure if he would come to Kiev and he would say something like, I'm Ukrainian, yes, or I'm with you, it would lead to Putin's regime to crumble. And it would bring the war to the end.
Well, I would love to see that happen. And I hate to kind of rehash this, but just before we move on, you mentioned that there are certain things that have been said by the Trump himself or the Trump administration that are clearly parroting Kremlin talking points. They've made equivalency by the cause of the war that both Ukraine and Russia are responsible for this war, not recognizing that there's a clear aggressor in the form of Moscow. Again, just another chance here. How concerned are you that somehow the Kremlin has their talking points inside the Trump administration, and they do seem to find fertile ground, their talking points inside the Trump administration. How much pause for concern does that give you?
Yes, I'm absolutely concerned about that, especially when officially Trump is trying in his official rhetoric to put on the same level as the victim and the aggressor. It's wrong from perspective of international law. It's political mistake because you cannot do it. You cannot blame the victim. It's extremely dangerous. I've been wondering why Trump is saying this. one of the explanations, maybe there is some kind of logic because he's, at least when you listen to Marco Rubio and Trump himself, that Trump wants to have nice relations with Putin, to bring him to the table of negotiation, to entice him by this kind of maybe sometimes flattery, sometimes repeating his talking points. Maybe this is the reason. But the ultimate goal is to cajole, to entice Putin to the table of negotiations. I don't believe that it will produce any result because, as we have said, it makes no sense. Putin will never negotiate.
Yeah, I mean, that leads me directly to my next question because I had the good fortune to speak to former Ambassador William Taylor, who was here when President Zelensky was inaugurated. And he said in his conversations with President Zelensky that he had hoped to carry through on his campaign promises of pursuing a peace with Putin, but he quickly realized, and this is in the words of Ambassador Taylor, Putin's not interested in peace. Putin, not back then and not today. Do you think there's a way to sit down across? Can President Zelensky sit down across from President Putin and engage in peace talks in good faith? Do you think that's something that's possible?
They can meet. And of course, on the one hand, we understand that in Russian totalitarian regime, totalitarian state, everything depends on the Tsar, on Putin himself. Yes. So if you want to have any kind of negotiations or dialogue, you should talk directly to him. On the other hand, I would—
because you have referred to Russia as a kind of modern day fascist state.
Yes, it is. It is a typical totalitarian fascist or neo-fascist regime. I have published an article and I approach this issue from a scientific point of view, sociological. I used, for example, arguments by one of the sociologists, Russian-American sociologist, by the way, Nicholas Timashev, who published a book about liberalism, fascism, and communism. And he came up with certain characteristic features of fascist state. And Russia fits nicely into this category of
highly militarized.
Yes.
Industry is owned by an oligarchy that pays tribute to the Kremlin, who is really just one man. It's the Tsar.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a new kind of fascism, which sometimes may be even more dangerous because it has a bigger propaganda machine than Nazi Germany, and it has nuclear weapons, unfortunately. So it's even more dangerous. Yes. So this is we also came up with this term Russism. Which consists of two elements, Russia and fascism. It combines because it's a very, I would say, from scientific point of view, Putinism or Russism is a very interesting phenomenon because it combines totalitarian practices and propaganda from extremes, extreme right and extreme left. And it's no wonder that Putin finances and supports in the West extreme right and extreme left. And these parties like Alternative for Germany, for example, it's very typical. It's part of his kind of neo-fascist ideology. And another peculiar feature for contemporary Russian fascism and for Putin as a Führer of this movement is that they accuse others of being Nazis, It's kind of psychological projection. When you accuse someone else for what you are, that's why it's very dangerous. And the West should understand this danger. Yes, we are dealing, and you can draw lots of parallels comparing with the history of the Second World War. Putin, he's like Hitler who invaded Poland. Now Putin invades Ukraine, or the Blitz, 1940. The Blitz. We're living during the times of Blitz, contemporary Blitz. Yep. And that's why people from the UK, you don't have to explain to them what's going on. They have it in their historical memory.
Their grandmother, their grandfather lived through the Blitz.
Yes.
They can sympathize with.
The British recognize themselves in us especially when they come to Ukraine and see for themselves. And when you take a picture, one of my first tweets was when the full-scale war started, I just took 2 pictures and put it on the tweet. One picture was taken in the metro of Kharkiv with people inside using as a bomb shelter, and picture from the tube, the British metro.
Yes.
And I just put them together, and, you didn't have to have any words to explain what's going on.
Well, as victims, as one of the most egregious victims of Russian fascism, what recommendation do you make for the rest of the world in dealing with a fascist Kremlin and a dictator like Putin? What's your recommendation to the international world dealing with this as a victim of their violence?
Yeah, I reread actually a book by a Polish international lawyer, Emil Stanislav Rapoport. Mm-hmm. And in 1945, he published a book about German Nazi regime. And he gave a recipe, prescription, what is to be done with such totalitarian fascist states. Quarantine, isolation, first of all. If you want to change them, you should isolate them in terms of information also, not to allow them to spread their propaganda, because it's very contagious, as we can see. Isolate diplomatically, politically, and economically, because Russia has enough resources to continue to wage aggressive war against Ukraine, because it gets money for its oil and gas. Mm-hmm. If we want to stop the aggression, we should stop Russia from receiving profits for selling its oil and gas.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to another topic that I think is important. But before we do, by the way, that propaganda of Nazism has been utilized here in Ukraine. That's been spread that Ukraine is filled with Nazis. And before we move on, and I mean, there are, in the legislative body that you are a member of, there aren't representatives of far-right Nazi groups. They got less than 3% of the vote, I believe, was in the last election before martial law. So yes, I whenever they're making accusations of Nazism against Ukraine, it's oftentimes reflected in their own existence in their own society. But let's talk about the Rada for a moment here. I've had the good fortune of meeting some members of the parliament and speaking with them here, and there is solidarity in the Rada, but that's not normal for the Rada. It is things can get heated between different parties within the Rada, but for now it seems to be staying together in solidarity. Talk to me a little bit about that, and is it sustainable that the Rada remains unified and doesn't fall into infighting?
There is such a danger of political life returning, yes, but it's natural. We should understand that we are democratic states and we should have opposition. And I value very highly opposition. I think that the role they play is extremely important. When they criticize us, the ruling party, the government, but still it's important. I'm in favor of preserving. It might be painful for us, yes, but for the sake of democracy, we should do it. At the same time, I'm nostalgic about the first year after the full-scale invasion in terms of political life in Rada. Because at that time, when the danger was looming large and the key was encircled, we absolutely forgot about all kinds of bickering, infighting, about politics. We were tremendously united and effective. For me, I recall it. For example, different factions, they had a sort of veto power while deciding the issue of what laws to put on the agenda, for instance. It was very effective. But politics is politics. And after a year, politics started to gradually come back. But at the same time, what we retain is our solidarity when we are talking about foreign policy. The best example is when we are going abroad as members of delegations like Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, Interparliamentary Union, NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and so on. These delegations include representatives of all factions. And we absolutely don't have any whatsoever disagreements. We support each other and we act in unison. It's like a synergy, even, And I'm proud of my colleagues from other opposition parties because I learn from them. Because sometimes they have more experience than me. They have been in these delegations for more years than me, and we communicate excellently and we fight together. So in terms of foreign policy, we don't have disagreements. But at the same time, politics is politics. It's normal to each party, each faction is trying to be popular, to make sometimes PR, hype, whatever. But it's their bread and butter.
Yeah.
We should respect that.
I'm going to start to wrap it up here, but before I do, one other quick question about politics and domestic politics in Ukraine. What is your response to the criticism that there should be a presidential election, that there's, that martial law maybe should be abridged or lifted so that there could be an election? What's your response to the criticism?
I'm a lawyer, and for me it's absolutely obvious that it can be done only after we lift martial law. Only after that. So our legislation is very clear about this. At the same time, Putin is trying to push this narrative, maybe even via or through Vitkov. And the danger is that he might be trying to push it through Trump. Mm-hmm. Because Putin understands that Zelensky, as a symbol of resistance to Russia and symbol of Ukrainian unity, presents very serious danger to Putin and to Russia. And he wants to remove this danger by using maybe American president, This is the danger. We should be very clear about this. Also, President Zelensky, he has very substantial popular support according to the polls.
Yes.
Any European leader would be envious and jealous about his support in Ukraine. We have agreement between the members of factions that elections will be held after the ending of the lifting of martial law.
Which was voted on legally under the Constitution by the Rada. You voted martial law in when the invasion, the full-scale invasion started.
And besides—
100% legal.
Yeah, and besides, to hold elections right now, even from technical, logistical point of view, it's extremely difficult. How can you guarantee transparency, democracy of elections when people are fighting, when, for instance, you cannot even guarantee security of voters? Mm-hmm. If they go to vote to the polling station and it can be bombarded by Russia, you cannot guarantee safety. When you have millions of people abroad, again, against another issue.
And people under occupation.
And
how you have 20% of your country under occupation. How are those Ukrainian citizens living in those occupied territories going to present their vote? How are they going to cast their ballot? So I'm with you there. I'm going to start to round down here, and then we'll draw this to a conclusion with some big picture questions. What kind of country are you trying to build here in Ukraine?
I lived in the United States for 3.5 years as a student on Fulbright program in different parts of the U.S., in Colorado, in Pennsylvania, in New York City, in Washington, as a scholar, and I even had experience of teaching at the university, at Graduate School of International Studies, Colorado University. And I like the model of the United States.
Even more so, perhaps, than the parliamentary systems of Europe?
Yes.
So you prefer kind of a congressional system?
Yeah. What I like most of all in your model, an American model, and which I would like to have also in Ukraine, first of all, independent judiciary. Mm-hmm. This is the key. This is the key for having investments, economic growth, and so on. Independent judiciary. And I respect it Not only because I'm a lawyer. As a student in 1992 at the University of Denver, I took a course on American constitutional law. It was so confusing because, lots of contradictory excerpts of decisions of the Supreme Court. But then I realized this is about logic and this is about justice. And this is about independence of judiciary. I also admire your constitution, by which I mean two things, which I want to see in Ukraine: checks and balances, and constitutional rights. I remember my professor of constitutional law in the US, he said, we are not democracy. He was talking about America. He said, we're constitutional democracy. And by that, he meant that the rights of minorities are protected by constitutional rights. They're sacred, like First Amendment, for example. This is something what I admire about your country, this spirit of freedom. This very American human right pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
Pursuit of happiness. It's very American human right. So, and I want to see Ukraine like the United States in this regard. Of course, we shouldn't forget our European cultural roots, but, we have a lot to learn from European countries, from the UK, from Germany, from France.
Well, all of those are still modern liberal democracies, which hold as cornerstones of their establishment in their states this idea of inalienable rights. That's in sharp contrast to your former imperial master in Moscow. The Russians do not believe in inalienable rights. As a matter of fact, they think it's rather naive and foolish of Western democracies to kind of hold this, that you're not born with rights. You have to fight for them, or they have to be granted to you by the state. And I would like your response to this is I think that's a big part of why Ukraine is fighting so hard. Yes. Is because a rejection of that kind of mentality. I wonder if you'd like to respond.
Russians in Ukraine, I don't know much about Russia because I haven't traveled. I've been only once at the conference like more than 20 years ago in Moscow. Oof. More than 20. So I cannot claim that I know deeply their culture. But from what I see a huge difference in terms of legal, political culture and even mentality. Mm-hmm. Because Russians, they're imperialists and they disdain dignity of a human being. They prefer they're very loyal to the Tsar, and they're ready to sacrifice their life, not thinking about it. So it's not about human rights. It's not about rule of law. It's rule of Tsar instead of rule of law. So it's a very different political and legal culture from what I see. Ukrainians, we tend to be independent. We don't like government, for example. We tend to be a little bit anarchistic sometimes, but which is a good thing.
The spirit of the Cossack.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. This is a Cossack republic, but there is more freedom in this. In this regard, we are closer to the United States with our spirit of freedom, and even the fact that if you look at the elections, you see that Ukrainians don't like someone to stay in power for very long, be it president or the parliament. Yeah. They enjoy to punish in this way during the election, yes, and to bring new politicians.
Well, this current circumstance is exceptional. So this is, but they've had, Ukraine has had a number of presidents since the fall of the Soviet Union, and Russia has had two.
Yes, exactly.
Second to last question is, and it follows on with what do you want to build internally within Ukraine? Where do you see Ukraine after the war on the international stage, on the global stage? Where would you like to see Ukraine placed?
Excellent question. I think we should think about it now, even though we are struggling for our survival, but we need to have this vision for the future. I believe that Ukraine can be one of the leaders of Europe because, first of all, we are, as it was famously stated by Ukrainian-American historian Serhiy Plokhy, the gate of Europe and the shield of Europe, I would add. So it's already our historical mission in Europe to be a shield. And also we can be one of the leaders in Europe. And I believe that it gives us a chance to have economic transformation. I want to see, for example, to use maybe experience of Singapore in terms of economic reforms, for instance, and we need to change. I would like to see. I'm professor of international law, and I would like to see, for example, branches of leading American European universities in Ukraine, because our next challenge after the war will be how to not to lose a young generation of Ukrainians. Mm-hmm. If we lose, we will not have future. That's why it will be a challenge how to create conditions for them and opportunities to turn our country, like the United States, into a country of opportunities, especially for young people, so that they would stay and would be interested in developing, in transforming their country. So, and we already won respect of European countries because they understand that we are one of the guarantors of all European security. That's why I think that Ukraine's future is bright, but it will ahead of us other difficult challenges, other difficult problems, but we will overcome in the final analysis.
Well, and the last question is related to that in the sense that I don't think people understand the suffering of Ukraine throughout its entire history. There have been just the ground is soaked with blood in Ukraine. You have been a strong advocate for recognition of the Holodomor as a genocide, and that's the forced starvation in the first part of the 20th century, which killed millions. You say there's a bright future for Ukraine. In the recognition, however, of the suffering of Ukraine, are you hopeful that you can heal the pain that you're going through currently, the pain that you have gone through with things like the Holodomor, which is there is generational pain and trauma in this country. Do you think by being successful in this war that those wounds can start to be healed and, as you say, lead to a much brighter future of Ukraine? I wonder if we could close with your thoughts on that.
It's a very profound question. Because, yes, it's true that each generation of Ukrainians had its own tragedy, a huge tragedy. And it's no coincidence that Timothy Snyder, he entitled his book Bloodlands. So in Ukraine is in epicenter of historical events and tragedies. Mm-hmm. What we understood with the full-scale invasion, when the delegation of parliament, members of parliament, we came after the president came to Bucha and Irpin, our delegation came after that, and what we saw, we realized that it's continuation of the genocidal policy of Russian Empire. So the kind of genocide which Russia is committing against Ukraine right now is continuation of Holodomor as a genocide. It's two parts of the same story. It's historically it's continuation of the same imperialistic genocidal policy. And it's a huge trauma because such tragedies which lead to murder of many decent people who otherwise would be able to build new Ukraine. Mm. We lost like in 30s, in 40s, we lost the whole generation, the so-called executed generation of writers, poets, and this war also leads to, unfortunately, many casualties among the best people of Ukraine because they were the first to stand up for Ukraine and to fight for Ukraine. And many of them, unfortunately, are not with us. I understand that ahead of us is a big trauma because right now we don't, it's like in the fighting when a person, a human being, is so much preoccupied with fighting that he doesn't notice wounds. The person will start feeling the wounds only after the fight came to an end. And the same will be with us. After the war, we only will start to feel these wounds, social wounds, wounds in terms of loss of lots of the best Ukrainians. And we'll have somehow to deal with it and to live with it. It will be also another challenge for us. But, I'm somehow, if we can draw any lesson from our tragic history, the lesson is that despite all odds, despite all tragedies, somehow Ukrainians managed to survive. We are survivors, after all. And I believe in this spirit of being survivor of Ukraine and Ukrainians. And this is something which gives me hope and optimism.
To paraphrase the opening stanza of your national anthem, the dream of Ukraine is not yet dead.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Well, I want you to know, Dr. Merezhko, that there are many Americans who are aware of your strength, your country's strength, your people's strength, and we support you 100%. It has been one of the great privileges and honors of my life to be here, to stand beside you in your time of need and to document it, to try and keep awareness up so that Russia's crimes don't happen in the dark. And I am very grateful to the entire nation of Ukraine for the hospitality and for the shining example that they have given to the rest of us. So I thank you very much for all of that. But I certainly thank you very much for coming and speaking to us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you to you personally, because, you're doing a great and extremely important job.
It's my honor.
And you understand that under circumstances we don't have enough capabilities to tell the truth, especially to the Americans, to Europeans. And what you're doing is extremely, extremely important for us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much.